everybody has a fish story, don't they? And none could be possibly better than a guy that told a fish story named George Costanza. Now, in case you've never seen Seinfeld, let me explain a couple of the characters to you. One is a guy named Kramer, and Kramer is this tall, kind of quirky guy. And at the beginning of this particular episode that you're going to see a clip from today, Kramer was on the beach, and we have a shot of him here. He's on the beach, and he's hitting golf balls out into the ocean. Now, keep that in mind. Now, George is this chronically underachieving guy that is always trying to find that perfect someone. And so his buddy Jerry meets a lady and begins to play matchmaker in an attempt to try to build George up, his buddy up a little bit. He deceptively says that George, for a living, is a marine biologist. Now, George was not a marine biologist, but he tells this lady, hey, my buddy George, marine biologist, you should go out with him. Well, they go out, they're on a date, they're walking the beach, they round the corner, and all of a sudden they see a crowd, and they're watching this whale that's in distress. And so all of a sudden somebody yells out, hey, is anybody here a marine biologist? Well, I could explain the rest of the story to you, but I'm going to let George tell you the story.
Save the whale, George. For me.
So I started to walk into the water. I won't lie to you, boys. I was terrified. But I pressed on. And as I made my way past the breakers, a strange calm came over me. I don't know if it was divine intervention or the kinship of all living things, but I tell you, Jerry, at that moment, I was a marine biologist.
George, I've just been reading this thing in the paper. It's unbelievable.
I know, I was just telling them the story.
Oh, come on, George. Finish the story.
The sea was angry that day, my friends. Like an old man trying to send back soup in a deli. I got about 50 feet out, and suddenly, the great beast appeared before me. I tell you, he was 10 stories high if he was a foot. As if sensing my presence, he let out a great bellow. I said, easy, big fella. And then, as I watched him struggling, I realized that something was obstructing its breathing. From where I was standing, I could see directly into the eye of the great fish.
Well,
Whatever.
what did you do next?
Well, then, from out of nowhere, a huge tidal wave lifted me, tossed me like a cork, and I found myself right on top of him, face to face with the blowhole. I could barely see from the waves crashing down upon me, but I knew something was there. So I reached my hand in, felt around, and pulled out the obstruction.
What is that, a Titleist? A hole in one, huh?
Now, that's a great fish story, right? I don't know if anybody can top that, but we have a guy that we're going to be talking about today that if Jonah were here, he might say, you know what, I could potentially top that story. Well, we're in the middle of a teaching series called Jonah, and welcome to those of you that are in the room. Welcome to you joining us virtually online as well. And last week, Andy kicked us off and got us talking about a guy named Jonah that's a prophet, mouthpiece for God, if you will, and he's on the run. He's running away from what God had asked him to do. And as a result of that disobedience, God, in his sovereignty and grace, still somehow managed to get Jonah's attention. You see, Jonah was this prophet that had listened to God, and God had told him, hey, I want you to go to Nineveh. And we discussed last week that Nineveh was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire, and they were bad boys. I mean, they were worse than bad. They were evil at times, and we won't get into all the things that the Assyrian Empire did. But God was sending Jonah there to their capital city of Nineveh, and now Jonah is representing God and Israel, and they are arch enemies here. And so this would be, to say the least, a tough assignment, a tough message to share and to preach. And so instead of going, Jonah says, hey, I'm not going to go. And he goes down to the port at Joppa, and he boards a ship. And the ship is actually headed towards Tarshish, and on the other side of the far side of the Mediterranean. Now, historians tell us that there had been trade routes already established as early as the 12th century BC. So these Phoenician ships, they very easily could have taken Jonah to southwestern Spain without a problem. That would have been available to Jonah. And God called him to go to Tarshish, which is in the direct opposite direction from the ship that he boarded. So it's almost like, to use an analogy for us today, like it would be like God saying, hey, Brian, I want you to go to a place down in South Florida. Matter of fact, we got a great picture. I want you to meet a couple of guys. These guys are legends on South Beach, Crockett and Tubbs, and I want you to hang out with Crockett and Tubbs for a while in Miami, and then instead I get on a plane in Huntsville, and I actually fly to Seattle, because I'm like, God, the Space Needle is way cooler than Crockett and Tubbs, and so I want to go and hang out in Seattle. Well, Jonah gets on the boat, and in chapter 1, verse 3 of Jonah, it says the reason he did that was to get away from the Lord, was to run from God. And God is just simply not going to let him hide or escape. He loves him too much. And so God shows up in the fury of a storm. And all of a sudden, the sailors eventually figure out that Jonah is the cause, and his disobedience is the cause of the storm. And so Jonah just says, hey, throw me overboard and the storm will be done, and God will deal with me in whatever he's got to do. And so the sailors are like, well, that sounds like a good option to me. And so they throw Jonah overboard into in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and Jonah starts sinking deeper and deeper at that point. And so I personally can't imagine drowning. I can't imagine the feeling of drowning. I had a first cousin that my aunt and uncle, they were stationed in Honolulu, and he was in the Air Force, and their son started surfing while he was there, and as an 18, 19-year-old guy, he was surfing one day, and the undertow caught him, and he found himself a mile, 2 miles offshore, way out in the ocean. And he described this harrowing ordeal to me, and it was pretty crazy. And a fisherman actually picked him up. But I can only imagine what is going through Jonah's mind as he's out in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, really thinking at that point that he could outrun God. He deliberately disobeyed God, and as a result of his actions, the consequences of those actions put a lot of other people in danger. And that happens, doesn't it? Like when we choose at times in our life to run from God and disobey God, it doesn't a lot of times just affect us, but the ripple effects are felt with people that are in close vicinity to us. Well, as a prophet, he's someone that's supposed to be close to God. Track with me on this, that he knows he's supposed to be doing what God's called him to do. If nobody else does, he should be obeying God. And so he's feeling, I would feel like, such a failure. And he's running out of air. It's dark. It's desperate. It's over. Man, what a way to go. And then, all of a sudden, Jonah chapter 1, verse 17. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now, that's a great fish story. Now, Scripture says here a huge fish, and it may or may not have been a whale. If we read over in the book of Job in the Old Testament, we see this term called Leviathan, which is this sea monster that they describe there. But it's a different Hebrew word than the word that we have here. But scholars believe in the Jonah story, it's most likely a huge fish or a mammal, probably some sort of a whale. Now, before you start thinking Free Willy or Finding Nemo here, I mean, this is actually a true story. Like my son and my daughters both, when they were young, I would tell them stories when they were 3, 4, 5 years old at night, and they would always want Dad to tell them a story. And then at the end of it, if it was kind of a crazy story about when I was a kid, then they would say, "Dad, is this a what? Is this a true story?" And well, in this situation, in this case, it is a true story. And you're thinking, "Oh yeah, right, Brian, like you were watching Mythbusters the other day, and the guy with the big mustache comes on and climbed into the mouth of a whale." Yeah, whatever. Is it really possible? Well, initially, the original language in the New Testament was the language of Greek. The New Testament was written in the Greek language. And Jesus actually references this story of Jonah in Matthew chapter 12, and he talks about the belly of the fish or the mammal, the whale. But the belly there, the term in the Greek, doesn't necessarily mean stomach. It just means that he was completely engulfed in the animal. And some believe he could have been in the oral cavity of the whale. A whale, which is a warm-blooded, oxygen-breathing mammal, periodically surfaces for air, and that would have provided much-needed oxygen for Jonah. And then while inside, the body would have protected him from hypothermia. Now, I don't know how it all works, and we'll probably never see it acted out on Mythbusters, but I did read in the Cape Cod Times back in June this past summer about a guy named Michael Packard. And Michael Packard was and is a commercial lobster diver. Maybe you saw this. This was the picture right after. This is actually Michael Packard. This is just a cool whale I found on Google Images. But this is Michael Packard after that morning. And early that morning, he was out doing his job as a commercial lobster diver, and he dove down, and then all of a sudden, this happened. And here's what he said. "All of a sudden, I felt this huge shove, and the next thing I knew, it was completely black. I could sense I was moving, and I could feel the whale squeezing with the muscles in his mouth." He was swallowed accidentally by a humpback whale. Well, his wife later told reporters, "Thank God it wasn't a white shark." Mr. Packard, you're my new hero. All right? You just proved that it is possible, right? But then at some point, there's certain things that you can't just logically prove or disprove, and they're called supernatural miracles, like the parting of the Red Sea, manna from heaven, the sun standing still, nor the walls of Jericho falling, nor Jesus feeding the 5,000, or walking on water, or him calming the storm, or calling this guy named Lazarus out of the tomb. They are supernatural miracles because they lie in the realm of the supernatural. Now, in case you're wondering, all of the stories that I just mentioned, the things that I just talked about, they were viewed by eyewitnesses, and they were passed down in an oral culture from generation to generation, not as fable, but as actual fact. In fact, one of Jesus' own followers, a guy named Peter, kind of the head disciple in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 16, he says, "For we were not making up clever stories when we told you about the powerful coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We saw his majestic splendor with our own eyes." As far as the Jonah fish story is concerned, Jesus himself in Matthew 12 and Luke 11 acknowledges the validity of it, and he uses that in front of a Jewish audience that would have been super familiar with the story of Jonah. And he says, look, take this story of Jonah. This is going to be a foreshadowing of what's going to happen to me. No, I'm not going to get swallowed by a whale, but 3 days, 3 nights, like, hang with me, crowd. Like, this is going to happen to me. Do you believe in the miraculous? I don't know if you do, but if you look around the room, you'll not only see the miraculous, but you'll see God's sense of humor, and that's us. Even if you're joining us virtually, if you're by yourself, look at your own hand, your feet, whatever. But the human body, it is amazing and humorous all at the same time. If you see the person beside you, you'll see someone that is made up of 10 trillion cells divided into 200 different types. You'll see someone with 45 miles of nerves in our skin alone. Did you know that over the course of our entire lifetime, that we will produce 25,000 quarts of spit, enough to fill 2 swimming pools, to which every junior high guy was like, that is amazing, right? The average human body contains enough iron to make a 3-inch nail, enough sulfur to kill all the fleas on an average dog, enough carbon to make 900 pencils, enough potassium to fire a toy cannon, enough fat to make 7 bars of soap, enough phosphorus to make 2,200 match heads, enough water to fill a 10-gallon tank. There are 60,000 miles of blood vessels in the human body, and our blood travels 12,000 miles a day. Our heart beats 35 million times a year, and over the average human lifetime, it pumps 1 million barrels of blood, enough to fill not 1, not 2, but 3 super tankers. If the small intestine were removed from the body, it would stretch to a length of 22 feet. According to the online medical journal about the small intestine, it says each of these cells contain thousands of tiny finger-like projections called villi, and each villus contains microscopic microvilli. In 1 square inch of small intestine, there are about 20,000 villi and 10 billion microvilli. Each villus brings in fresh oxygenated blood and sends out nutrient-enriched blood. The villi sway constantly to stir up liquefied food and remove the nutrients, which can be absorbed and then passed through the membranes of the villi into the blood and lymph vessels. The fatty nutrients go to the lymph vessels, and glucose and amino acids go to the blood and onto the liver. The muscles which encircle this tube constrict about 7 to 12 times a minute to move the food back and forth, to churn it, knead it, and to mix it with gastric juices. And some tell me that this all just happened by accident. It's a miraculous design. Every time we see the birth of a child, we say, wow, I saw God today. I mean, we're talking about the one who spoke the world into existence, who made lightning bugs, the creator of DNA, the one who set the ocean tides to the lunar schedule, the designer of photosynthesis, the one who flung the stars into the sky and called every one of them by name. If he did all of this, I think he can arrange for a great fish, mammal, whom he created to show up at the right second to grab his kid in need. You know, some think that Jonah getting swallowed by a great fish, a mammal, was how God actually punished Jonah. But it actually was the opposite. This fish was the means through which his life was actually saved. I mean, it's kind of an amazing thought, if you think about it, that God loved Jonah even in his disobedience, and supernaturally called Enterprise rent a whale because they'll pick you up, right? And he spoke to this fish and he said, hey, go and get my guy. And he did. The God of second chances pulled this whole thing off. You see, Jonah deserved death because of his disobedience. And God showed extraordinary mercy and grace. Talk about pursuing someone. Jonah chapter 1, verse 17, the latter part of that says 3 days and 3 nights. Now, that was a common Jewish measurement of time. So it could have actually been like part of a day, a whole day, and then part of another day. But while he's in there, he has time to process and think and to pray. And maybe you've been there. Ever been alone in kind of a dark place in your life, and you're lonely and you're discouraged and you're not sure where the answer is going to come from to whatever dilemma and problem that you are facing and processing, and you're not sure how you're going to connect with God in that moment. And I mean, it can be a pivotal time for you. And Jonah had a chance to do that. And while he was there, he began to connect and communicate to God, which tells me that if Jonah can pray and connect with God there, like we can pray and connect with God anywhere, wherever we are. But once he was out, Jonah wrote what I call a rescue psalm. He wrote his story of how God rescued him even in his time of running away from him. Look at Jonah chapter 2, verse 1. He says, "From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, 'In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me from deep in the realm of the dead. I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths in the very heart of the seas, and the current swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. The roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever.'" And if you stop there, there's no hope, right? It's dark. It's sad. It's lonely. Man, maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there. Maybe you've had a similar experience, a dark night of the soul moment. I mean, maybe you would agree with this statement that even though you may not always see him, God is always at work, even in the darkness. Even though you may not always see him, God is still at work, even in the dark moments. When you're in too deep and you're on the run and you're desperate and dark, God is still at work. He is still with you. I want to show you a picture. This man's name is Christian Rieger, and Christian, he spent 4 years in the infamous Nazi concentration camp called Dachau, and he was there from 1941 to 1945. And why was he there? Well, just because he was a follower of Jesus who stood up to the Nazi regime. And he said this about his time there in Dachau. He said, "Nietzsche said that a man can undergo torture if he knows the why of his life. But here at Dachau, I learned something far greater. I learned to know the who of my life. He was enough to sustain me then and is enough to sustain me still." Look, listen to me. God has not abandoned you. God is with you. He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't written you off because you ran away. He's still pursuing you. He has not left you to drown in the middle of the ocean. He is the who in whatever your deep sea experience is right now in your life. He is with you in the water. He is at work in the dark. Somebody can say amen at that point. Just that's okay, right? Man, God hasn't abandoned you. No matter how dark the day gets, no matter how hard it is, no matter if there's no light coming through, he's still there. Get honest with God and cry out like Jonah did. He'll meet you in that place. Other psalm writers, King David said in Psalm 69 verse 1, "Save me, O God, for the floodwaters are up to my neck. Deeper and deeper I sink into the mire. I can't find a foothold. I am in deep water, and the floods, they overwhelm me. I'm exhausted from crying for help. My throat is parched. My eyes are swollen with weeping, waiting for my God to help me." You say, "Father, help me see beyond the darkness." Maybe this is the prayer that you need to pray today. To see your hand, God, help me to trust the fact that you see the bigger picture at play, and you're with me, and you love me with an unfailing love. Oh, what if we prayed that type of just an honest prayer? Author Brennan Manning says this: "May all your expectations be frustrated. May all your plans be thwarted. May all your desires be withered into nothingness, that you may experience the powerlessness and poverty of a child, and then sing and dance in the compassion of God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Sometimes when we realize that we need help, that we're going to drown on our own, that is actually the best place that we can be. Jonah prays. He says, I sank down to the very roots of the mountain. I was imprisoned. But verse 6, look at the shift that happens in verse 6b. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. I mean, this whole prayer, this rescue psalm that Jonah writes and prays, it's not a prayer for deliverance. Like that would have been the prayer that I would have been praying, God, deliver me, save me, right? But this psalm, this prayer, it's a song of thanksgiving to God. Because in fact, God did rescue him. Jonah would have been familiar with the Psalms of David and others, and so maybe he drew on that language. Psalm 86, verse 12. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you, dear Lord. I've never kept secret what you're up to. You've always been great towards me. What love. You snatched me from the brink of disaster. Psalm 42. Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. All your waves and breakers have swept over me. I love what another prophet, Jeremiah, says in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3. That they tried to end my life in a pit and threw stones at me. The waters closed over my head, and then I thought I was about to perish. I called on your name, Lord, from the depths of the pit. You heard my plea. Do not close your ears to my cry for relief. You came near when I called you, and you said, do not fear. Do not fear. Now look at what Jonah writes in Jonah chapter 2, verse 7. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. Look, in life, man, we can pursue a lot of things, can't we? We can go hard after a lot of accomplishments and a lot of success. A lot of little g gods oftentimes dominate our time and our energy. But if so, we will miss out on the love and the grace and the experience of knowing God personally, who wants to walk with us every single day of our life, not just when we're drowning, but he wants to be with us. Jonah is saying, hey, you would be crazy if he were here today. He would say, guys, you would be crazy to turn your back on God's love and grace and forgiveness and his mercies that are new every single morning. Look how Jonah concludes, verse 9. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. I will praise you, God, and I will do whatever you ask me to do, for you rescued me. Now, look, I know we're not in school, but I want to give you a homework assignment this week. And here's my challenge. I want you to write your own rescue psalm. I want you to write your own story of how God rescued you. And if you don't have one, then what if today could be your day? What if today you could say, God, I want to start my rescue psalm today. In this moment, I want you to rescue me. And whenever you write it, I want you to send it to me. And I couldn't think of a better email address than jonah@rocketcitychurch.com. So write out your rescue psalm and then send it to jonah@rocketcitychurch.com. And you're saying, well, man, Brian, I wish I had a real world example. I wish I kind of, like I get it, that was Jonah, but if I want to share a few actual real world examples of rescue psalms that people from all walks of life have written, from other churches that I've been a part of. And I want to share some of these with you. This is a lady who went through a tough divorce. She said, in an empty house with a broken heart, I called to the Lord and he answered me. I was hurled into a world I didn't know, working outside the home, managing finances, making decisions all by myself. I was now without a husband, lost from old friends, faced with confused children. I had nights without sleep and days without purpose. All I had once known and loved was gone. But you, she writes, O Lord, heard my cry, and you saved me. You reminded me of your presence, your promise to never leave me nor forsake me. You brought friends from far and wide to give me strength, shower me with love, point me to my purpose. They brought furniture for my house, food for my cupboards, and a car filled with gas, and started me on my way to a business all my own. You brought me to a place of worship and prayer that changed my life forever. You became all I needed or ever would need, my constant companion who whispered encouragement and love and even sometimes reminded me to turn off the stove. My heart is so full, sometimes I think it will burst. You came and saved me from my darkest hours and brought light that refuses to fade. Someone else wrote, "Oh Lord, when I heard the words, 'it's cancer,' I was consumed with disbelief and fear. No, not me, Lord. Not another tragedy to my family. Oh God, I am scared." Then, just as suddenly from the depths of my fear and pain, you spoke to my heart, "I am the rock that you can stand on." I praise and give you glory for your mercy, grace, and love. Every day of my life, on the solid rock, I stand. A woman who went through a miscarriage and long struggle with infertility, she said, "Lord of my life, can you hear the groanings of my soul? Too exhausted to cry out to you, I murmur prayers in the dark. Can you hear me? I am storm-tossed with anxiety, and my soul is restless and weary. In your tenderness, hold me close. Let me weep in your embrace till I fall asleep. Awake me with a new song in my heart. You are my God of hope. You fill my heart with joy and peace as I put my trust in you." Another guy, he wrote, "I cried out to God because of trouble that surrounded me in every direction that I turned. I called his name and he heard me from the worst of places: pornography, divorce, disobedience, failure. I had fallen and was in a pit. Depression and fear ripped into me because of my sin. I cried to you even though I felt unforgiven and alone. And when I thought it could not get any worse, financial challenges arose. Trouble on every side. I went down as far as I could go. So I thought to just end it all, to just stop breathing. And then I remembered the Lord. I remembered your promises to never leave me nor forsake me, and that you would cause it all to work together for what? For good. I cried to you again, and you heard me. You saved me from myself and my sin and delivered me. You forgave me, and you called me. Therefore, I will praise you, the God of my salvation. Salvation belongs to God. Salvation belongs to God. A lady writes who was rescued from a long-time battle with drug abuse. She says, "As I sit in the living room in a cloud of smoke, I'm thinking I'm drowning. I thought it's just pot, but in reality, I was sinking deeper and deeper into Satan's hands. But now I know that God was by my side, and when I reached up, he reached down and pulled me out of the cloud. When my head was full of smoke, I couldn't see you, Lord. But now that my head is clear, I look back and I see where you held my hands through the rough times. I will praise you daily for making my life worth living. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord." From a girl who was rescued from an eating disorder, barred beneath my pit of perfection, the scale, the mirror, the failure, the pressure. My worth was my weight. To be more was to be less. I was always full, always empty, always never enough, until my salvation came from the Lord. For I have been rescued by my God. Without charge, he brought me up from the pit, my Father, my rock, my reclaimer of years. He has restored the weight of my worth. To be less makes him more. He is always full, never empty, always more than enough. This from a girl who found herself alone and pregnant. Her baby's father had been arrested for first-degree murder. She lost friends, just about everything she owned, and so she made a choice to drive her car off of the local bridge. And she talks about how the gas light had just come on, so she knew it was now or never, and then suddenly everything changed. For the first time, she felt her son move inside of her. And she writes, alone and scared, nowhere to turn, yet another sign that I am not your concern. So now what? Raise him alone, a boy without a father? But why should you even bother? My past no longer wants me. No future do I hold. One last choice is all I have. No need for us to go on alone. The answer became clear. The edge became near. And then suddenly, as if time had stopped, my foot came off the pedal and I turned to avoid the drop. For the first time ever, I felt him move as if to say, but Mom, I need you. And him, he's my dad. And promises that we'll be okay. Another guy writes, for years I ran as hard and fast as I could away from God. My desires evolved around material things, BMWs, Mercedes, Porsches, anything that gave the appearance of success to other people. I, like Jonah, was drowning in debt, chasing something that I couldn't get. No matter what I achieved, it was never enough. I felt lonely, empty, unfulfilled. Nothing seemed to satisfy me. I kept chasing the dollars and hating myself. I believe you, oh God, allowed me to spiral out of control. You let me sink to the bottom until the light turned to dark. And then you put people in my life that loved God and showed me how to love you. It's like the sun was coming out. It was like swimming from the dark abyss to the sunlight of the surface. Today I have real friends that accept me, not for who they think I am or what I can do for them. I have you, O Lord, to thank for this. I have discovered that it's not all about me. It's all about you. You have pulled me up from the grave alive, just like Jonah. My salvation belongs to God. So what's your near drowning experience? What's your fish story? We all have one. Everybody's got a fish story, right? How did God rescue you? Maybe it wasn't a fish that came along. Maybe God provided a friend. Instead of a whale, it was a text message or a phone call or somebody that gave you a book that started your journey. Maybe it was a child that tugged on your pant leg at some point and said, hey, Dad, can we go to church? Like I've got some other friends that are going and it seems like fun and can we go? Maybe it was somebody that took you to an AA meeting, your first one. Maybe it was a missions trip. Maybe it was a worship experience. Maybe it was from sitting in a church kind of like this or joining virtually in this moment and you felt like you were the only one drowning, right? You're it. Brian, you don't really know my situation. The stories you just read pale in comparison to me. I need rescue. Well, the good news is God's still pursuing you. He's still with you. So your homework this week is to take some time and write a rescue psalm. You see, the story of Jonah, it's a story really not about a prophet that's disobedient. Like we've heard that. We've lived that story, right? But it's the story of a God who will do whatever it takes to pursue his kids. Even to the point of sending his own son into the world to die for me and to die for you, to reconcile us to him. That's how much he loves us. You see, Jesus told the story of Jonah in Mark 12 and Luke 11 just to show, hey, you know what? It's going to happen to me. Like I'm going to die and 3 days later I'm going to rise from the grave. And where Jonah failed, like I'm going to succeed. I'm the Son of God. You can believe in me. Well, last week, we had a great time together. Today has been powerful as well. I want to leave us with one more verse. Out of Jonah chapter 2, it says, and the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. So where do you think Jonah went from here? Yeah, I'm guessing he went to Nineveh this time. But you'll have to join us next week to see. God